Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Okay, so this episode is probably one of the more important ones we've gotten because this episode, in addition to setting up who the next set of antagonists are going to be going forward, this episode actually explains how stands work and it explains where they came from, and it's actually a pretty interesting idea. But in case the episode opens up with Mista and Narancia running toward the group's boat, while Trish, Bucciarati, and Giorno are actually sitting inside of Mr. President and are trying to actually figure out where they can actually ID the boss. And what we find out is that Trish has actually used her ability to preserve the death mask of the boss's face so that they can have it as a reference. So it implies that it wasn't completely destroyed. She used her ability to turn it to create a bust out of it, and so that they can keep it and use that as a further reference. But of course, what we quickly find out is that they're having a very difficult time trying to figure out who the boss actually is, because as Giorno quickly realizes, he's not in any sort of criminal database, and of course both Giorno and Bucciarati remark that makes sense, pointing out that obviously the boss is a very thorough person. Obviously, the boss is the kind of person who would make sure that everything, including involving his past, would actually be destroyed and erased. And obviously, that includes a criminal record. If there is indeed a criminal record that exists, obviously, it is going to be completely and utterly destroyed by the boss, so that nobody can track him that way. And of course, it's at this point where Trish points out that obviously she senses that her father is close because since she shares a bloodline with him, she can sense where he is and because of that they're connected. And she does point out and she does seem to imply that the person who would kill the Baccio was in fact her father. So they quickly realize that they need to figure out what's going on, otherwise he's probably going to come after them as well. And of course, Bucciarati does indeed reinforce the point, pointing out that obviously they need to figure out who the boss's identity is quickly, because otherwise they're going to lose and they're not going to win. At which point, Giorno suggests that maybe they can find a way to find somebody by going through people who are deceased, pointing out that obviously the boss doesn't want anybody knowing about his past. It would also make sense that he would try and fake his death at one point to kind of make it seem like he died, so that nobody thinks it's actually him. And of course, Bucciarati immediately points out that it's worth a shot and tells Giorno to go ahead. And of course, Giorno is having a very difficult time actually finding it that way as well, because obviously he remarks that the boss is actually very thorough, and points out that obviously if the boss had indeed faked his own death, they probably would have found something. But obviously they can't find his fingerprints or anything else that they can actually find. So for that reason, he does indeed point out that he doesn't feel like he can actually find it. But it's at this point where suddenly they hear a voice coming from the computer, and it's someone they don't recognize. And sure enough, they actually wind up seeing somebody hack onto their computer, and although they don't know who it is, and of course the person on the other end, whose name we do not learn in this episode, he proceeds to point out that he had been waiting for somebody to actually find out the boss's identity for the longest time, and of course Bucciarati is immediately skeptical because somebody tried to actually wind up hacking onto their computer through a back door, But the man on the other end reassures them that they're on their side, and even though they have no real proof about that until the man reveals that they're trying to go after Diavolo, which, as it turns out, is the boss's actual name. And of course everybody perks up at that, because obviously that's the first time they've actually heard the boss's name, and does point out that obviously he's been trying to find someone who can fight Diavolo for the longest time. and has indeed been explaining to somebody that obviously they need to figure out what's going on and how to actually deal with Diavolo. But of course, Bucciarati still isn't entirely convinced, pointing out that even if they do know the boss's name now, that doesn't necessarily conclude that the person is on their side, and tells Giorno to proceed to cut the connection until the man on the other end reveals that he also knows what King Crimson does, and of course, this also, once again, makes them realize that maybe this guy is indeed on their side, because obviously none of the bosses, obviously they were going on the logic of that, even though the guy knows the Diavolo's real name. Obviously, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's on the side, because obviously he would trust his underlings and more than enough to actually know his real name. But the fact that he also knows what King Crimson can actually do, that winds up being more than enough evidence for them to go on and go forward. And of course, this is where the Perk character on the other end, he tells them that obviously if they want his help, they're going to have to come to him. And of course, initially Bruno is very skeptical about the whole idea, pointing out that obviously they don't really know who this person is or whether or not they can trust him. But obviously they realize they have no choice, since obviously he points out that obviously they're going to need that sort of information to actually defeat the boss. And of course, the person on the other hand does reveal that obviously they don't have to trust him, but they kind of have to if they want a chance of actually being the boss. And then points out that obviously they should know what this is, and then proceeds to show them a picture of a stand arrow, which of course both Bruno and Giorno know what it is. They both, that's how they gain their stands, and obviously they know that Popo had one. They obviously know that Popo had one and was using that to create stand users. So obviously Bruno knows one, and Giorno does as well, since he passed the initiation and also proceeded to kill him, so he couldn't create any more stand users. But of course they're very confused as to why he has it, and but also points out that obviously they know the purpose of they do know the purpose of what the stand arrow does. And of course the man on the other end, he does confirm that yes, that is indeed one purpose of it, but then reveals that it actually has a secondary purpose that will actually help them in their mission. And when they wonder what he means about that, he does point out that obviously King Crimson is established to be invincible. He explains that because of its ability to erase time, nobody can go and touch him. Nobody. Literally no one can go up to him and fight him, and points out that even if they have any sort of chance of actually going in and fighting him, and even if they did know his identity, they're not going to be able to win because of King Crimson. But he points out that the stand arrow will enable them to win, pointing out that there's actually a secret to it that most people don't know, and does proceed to explain that it will indeed give them an edge in actually being able to actually beat King Crimson. And with a goal in mind, Bucciarati then finally asks the man where he is, pointing out that obviously if the stand arrow is going to give them a chance of actually being the boss, they're going to need it ASAP. And it's at this point where the man explains that he's actually in Rome and that they'll have to go and find him, but also points out that they're going to have to come to him, since his body is currently in a position where it's unable to fight back anymore. So he's unable to actually fight back against the boss, and they're going to need to come to him in order for them to have the best chance. And with that, they now have a clear goal in mind and proceed to get ready to get back on their. And it's at this point where Narancia and Misa, who have just been listening to this whole conversation from outside the turtle, from outside, they jump into the boat with Coco Jumbo in hand and proceed to ride off to Rome. Meanwhile, the boss has sensed that something isn't quite right, and then proceeds to quote-unquote call Doppio using his dissociative identity disorder, at which point Doppio then proceeds to scare a trio of female tourists by snatching one of their ice cream cones to use as a phone, which scares them and they run off. And of course, the boss then proceeds to point out that something doesn't feel quite right, and telling them that obviously if they had lost the Baccio, they should have lost all purpose and not have any idea of what to do. But that seems to be the exact opposite. They are now driving off with an explicit purpose, and points out that obviously that means something is very strange is going on, and he doesn't know why they're able to go off without purpose, and that's what he tasks Doppio with actually investigating. And sure enough, Doppio then proceeds to go to the stele, but can't find anything out of the ordinary because it's already been destroyed. And And of course, this causes the boss to become even more paranoid, because obviously there was something they didn't know that was in the stele that obviously they need to know now, and tells Doppio that they should try and figure out where the team is going, and also points out that he should probably enlist the help of two new stand users called Chocolata and Secco, and we don't really find out much about Chocolata and Secco until the latter half of the episode, but they are silhouetted here. And but what we do find out is that the boss, despite them being part of his special unit, he doesn't trust either of them. He openly admits that they are scum of the earth, and he does not like them. But he does point out that in this situation, he kind of has no choice unless if he wants to keep his identity a secret. So with that, he tells them to actually go off and go find Chocolat and Secco and send them to actually intercept Team Bucciarati, while also telling Doppio to get to figure out where they're going immediately and going to go find them. And of course it's at this point where Doppio understands exactly what he's talking about, and the boss points out that this is absolutely what it means to be alive, pointing out that obviously being able to pursue somebody and being able to keep yourself in complete anonymity, and also protect your own existence, that is what the state of being alive is. And so at this point, we're still on the boat. Team Bucciarati then proceed to ask the person on the other end of their quote unquote call for more information. At which point the person on the other end then proceeds to reveal how stands work and how they come to exist. And it's a very interesting concept, because it's kind of based on a real world concept called viral evolution. And basically how the guy explains it on the other end is that obviously not so much obviously, but in Cape York, Greenland, which the person on the other end explains is where Inuit people actually live in Greenland, but in Cape York, there's a meteor. There's apparently a very famous meteorite. I have no idea, but there's a very famous meteorite that crash landed to Earth in Cape York, Greenland, and several people went to go investigate it. And there was obviously an excavation team that went to go and investigate it and find out the natural resources. But two of the people who came in contact with the meteorite suddenly started feeling very strange and came down with a fever. And sure enough, they proceeded to collapse. They were inside they were put inside medical tents, and over the course of several days, their body then proceeded to decompose and boil up and turn into tomato paste. But interestingly, one of them developed stand abilities. Interestingly, one of them had the ability to fire electricity from his fingertips shortly before he died. He wasn't able to fully manifest it, but as we find out, this is actually the origins of where the stand arrows came from. As we find out, the stand arrows were created by an Inuit chief who wanted to create powers that rivaled God. So he carved up the meteorites into several pieces of arrows. He carved it up into several arrowheads, and then it's revealed how the stand arrows actually select their victims. As we find out, normally the virus will kill you. That is what's been established. If you don't have the ability, if the virus will straight up kill you. But the few people that are able to survive the virus and live long enough, as it turns out, that is what actually awards people their stands. If they're able to survive, and that explains why Holly Joestar. That would explain why she got sick very early on in part 3. She didn't have the potential to actually develop a stand, so she wound up developing an illness. And also why Josuke developed an illness as well. He didn't have the ability, he didn't have the resolve to develop a stand, but after seeing his savior save him, he developed a newfound sense of newfound sense of righteousness, and that is what enabled him to develop a stand. If you are able to develop a stand, it will give you a stand. Otherwise, it will make you sick, as demonstrated with both Holly and Josuke. But he does explain that the few that do survive, they will develop full-blown stands, and then proceeds to picture the several members of the original Stardust Crusaders, which implies which of course is implied that it's been revealed at this point that that's how Dio acquired his stand, and also to a lesser extent how Jotaro developed his stand, because obviously Dio got shot with the stand arrow. It caused his ability ability to develop his stance to trickle down through the Joestar bloodline. That is established. That is why every single Joestar from this point onward has a stand. But also this implies that whoever's on the other end has a connection to the Stardust Crusaders, and I'm kind of interested about that. I have no idea who this new person is, but it sounds like an interesting connection that I do think they're going to address at some point. But in case he does proceed to explain that, obviously that's one interpretation, but does point out that if used again, it implies that there actually isn't indeed more abilities that can be acquired, and that was indeed demonstrated with Yoshikage Kira at the end of Part 4. He got stabbed with the arrow again, and he gained a new ability. And of course, this was also kind of implied that's with Giorno, since he was almost pierced by the arrow when he fought Black Sabbath. He was almost pierced again with the arrow when he fought Black Sabbath, but nothing came of it. But it implies that was eventually going to be a thing, and sure enough, this is where it came up. But of course, Bucciarati then proceeded to hear all this and wonders what exactly it is he's talking about and what this new ability is. But of course, obviously for reasons, because they obviously can't go directly to actually tell everybody what it is over an unsecure line. Especially considering that he doesn't know who could be listening. He does point out that obviously they need to keep it as safe as possible, otherwise they will lose the advantage and they won't be able to defeat Diavolo. But does tell them that once they find him at the Roman Colosseum, he will be more than happy to share what information he has for them, and does point out that it will make things a lot safer. But for the time being, he just kind of has to keep that secret. And now with the newfound destination, they then proceed to tell the rest of their team, namely Misa, who is guiding the boat. They tell Misa to actually speed up toward Rome, and of course what we find out is that Doppio has apparently figured out that they're going to Rome as well. Having apparently watched them go to Rome from his plane where he's trying to catch them, and does point out that it seems like they're going to Rome, and of course, once again, the boss does congratulate Doppio on his diligence, but also points out that obviously that's very dangerous, since obviously they can meet an ally in Rome. But it does point out that now that they knows where they are, he can easily track them and figure out where they're going and send Chocolate and Secco after them. Again, he points out that he doesn't like Chocolate or Secco, and does point out that for obvious reasons that's going to be very dangerous. But he does point out that he could indeed very much send them there and keep Team Bucciarati from actually figuring out his weaknesses, and also find a way to actually defeat him. So for the time being, he's willing to work with Chocolate and Secco. He does point out that that he's going to have to. But in case he does point out that to tell Doppio to stay the course and keep looking after them, and tells them that obviously Doppio's the only one he can trust, because for obvious reasons they share the same body. Obviously, if you can't trust yourself, who can you trust? But he does tell Doppio that he can only trust his number one with this, and tells Doppio that he needs to continue to keep an eye on them. And Doppio does agree that he'll do his best to do the mission that was given to the boss, and hangs up. And of course, what we find out is that he actually borrowed a kitty phone from a nearby little girl to actually use as his phone. Meanwhile, what we find out is that there are actually several drunks that are just kind of loitering around Rome, and it's unclear. And of course, it's unclear what's going on. But and of course, they're very much drunk. One of them is trying to pee into a water fountain, while the other actually does start peeing into a nearby post box. And the two of them are together, and the one guy is telling the guy hugging the the water fountain to not pee in the water fountain, because that's a bad idea. And And of course, it's at this point where Misa and Narancia do indeed arrive on the beach, and they arrive on the coast of Rome and are looking around trying to figure out what's going on. And sure enough, Misa points out that obviously there are a lot of people that are drunk nearby, and points out that they'll have to wait until they go away to leave. And points out that obviously it's very dangerous for them to go out and be spotted by possible civilians. But of course, Narancia points out that obviously once they go away, they'll be able to actually easily climb up onto the shoreline and be able to navigate the city safely and find who they're looking for. But as they're actually looking around, Nista actually winds up noticing something strange through his binoculars, and we do find out what it is. Obviously I talked about the one guy who peed into the post box, and the other guy who's currently hugging a water fountain. But of course, the guy who peed into the post box is trying to rip his friend away from the water fountain to keep him from alleviating himself in it. But then we notice something, and that's his torso moves away from the water fountain, but his legs don't, and that winds up being completely strange. And sure enough, what we see is the man has completely come in half, and there is just mold in the middle of his body. And yeah, there's just green bubbly stuff coming up off of his body, and of course this causes the guy to immediately panic because he doesn't want to touch it. But then his legs wind up dissolving, and he winds up dying that way. And this of course causes Misa to immediately panic and wonder what exactly it is that's going on. But he immediately pulls out his gun, but then it starts bubbling up over his hand, which of course causes him to panic as well, and he has no idea what's going on. And of course Bucciarati immediately asks Misa for a update, pointing out that obviously something is very strange is going on. But and Misa just kind of points out that obviously something has gone completely wrong. And does point out that not only is he now covered in some bubbly stuff, but 2 people just died from it, and as have several other civilians. And of course, this causes Bruno to immediately panic, pointing out that obviously they need to be very careful, because obviously they now need to get up to shore as quickly as possible to figure out where the stand user is. And sure enough, Narancia immediately summons Aerosmiths, who actually start looking around, but quickly discovers that he can't find anybody. There's literally no breathing in range of his stand, and does wonder, and of course can't actually find anybody because obviously everybody is dead. And that winds up launching Narancia a little bit. And once he realizes that he can't find anybody, he immediately panics and tries to go back on the boat. Which and of course Bruno does indeed reassure them that might be the correct solution, pointing out that obviously if they get out of range of the stands, that should save them. But of course this does wind up causing an immediate problem, and that's obviously they can't move until they figure out what the stand is, and obviously there's some sort of trigger that enables the stand to move around and do a bunch of other things and infect people. And sure enough, Narancia then immediately climbs onto the boat, and sure enough, he winds up getting covered in mold as well, and of course Coco Jumbo winds up getting covered in mold a little bit as well, and of course what we find out is that Secco and Chocolata have actually been watching the whole thing, and we do finally see them, and I feel like I should mention Chocolata specifically because A, it goes into his origin story a little bit here, but B, this is the guy who was implied to have killed Sobre and Gelato. He and Secco aren't fully revealed until this episode, but they're implied to be the ones the boss said. I thought it was the boss initially, but now looking at later episodes, it's not the case. But this guy is more of a match for that. He looks like the guy who killed Chocolate and Secco, and I think that's implied. But of course, Chocolate tells Secco. But of course, we meet Chocolate and Secco, and Chocolate tells Secco to continue filming, pointing out that the worst thing that could possibly happen is that they run out of battery and realize they're not filming. At which point, we then go into Chocolate's origin story, where, as it turns out, he was a doctor, and he was let go because of an accident. But what we find out is that eventually Passion took him in, at which point the boss figured out that it was in fact no accident. As it turns out, and there's a reason the boss doesn't like him and thinks he's scum of the earth. As it turns out, it wasn't an act of malpractice. He just really likes messing with people and doing human experimentation. As we find out, he not only would he operate on healthy people, but he would also reduce their anesthetic so that they would wake up in the middle of surgery. and then obviously they would panic because somebody is ripping out their guts from their stomach and is just toying with them, and of course, obviously, Chocolata was let go because it looked like malpractice. Nobody really investigated, being like, oh, people have died. A couple of people have died. It's probably a malpractice thing, and he needs to be let go. But as it turns out, no, he did that on purpose. And then we find out that he actually had a previous occupation, which is a lot worse, because as we find out, he used to work in a nursing home. And he would just straight up tell the patients that they were going to die and that nobody loved them and that nobody was ever going to visit them. And this just caused them all to commit suicide after he told them that, because he just made them fall into despair. And what we find out is that he just likes watching people die, because he thinks that's the nature that enables him to find out more about human nature and stuff like that. He thinks that they're going. He straight up tells them that they're going to die because he thinks that he just likes playing with people. He likes screwing with people, and what we find out is that the only real friend he ever made and his partner was Seko, who apparently was a former patient of his, and apparently not only survived the procedure on account of him also being a stand user, but he also apparently just survived the ordeal and now follows Seko now follows Chocolate around and kind of does his bidding. And of course they do have a bit of a dominant submissive personality type. They work together. They're codependent, but and of course Chocolate and Seko are very much watching the whole thing, and Chocolate takes delight in the fact that he's able to finally see see how they're actually going to squirm and actually die in front of him. But and of course, once Misa starts molding up, once Narancia starts molding up, Misa tries to reach out for him, but Giorno tells him not to move, pointing out that obviously there's an unknown trigger that they're trying to figure out, and doesn't know what exactly is going on. And Narancia, of course, doesn't fully understand what the trigger is, so he lowers his hand, and it's at this point where the mold actually starts growing on his fingertips, and it's at this point where he finally realizes how the stand actually works. As he quickly finds out, Chocolate stand, which Chocolate reveals, and it's actually named Green Day, but Chocolate stand, as we find out, it has the ability to create mold, but it's an altitude-based thing. As Misa quickly puts together, it is an altitude-based thing, and anytime they lower their altitude, that's what causes them to actually grow mold. Case in point, when Narancia jumped into the boat, he started growing mold. When Misa went to go reach down for his gun and also tried to go save Misa, that's what caused him to grow mold as well. And obviously, because the turtle will wound up lowering its altitude as well, it started growing mold in addition to that, as well as Giorno and everybody else in the turtle. And of course, Giorno then proceeds to point out that this is very much like some sorts of fungus and mold that actually take over insects and cause them to go to a lower altitude so they can grow. And points out that Green Day seems to work exactly like that. But and does point out that they're going to need to find a way to get them back to a higher altitude without actually constantly lowering or raising their altitude as well. And it's at this point where of course Misa eventually comes up with a really brilliant idea and tells Narancia to throw the turtle. And Narancia doesn't do that. He loses a couple of fingers in the process because his hands are molding up, but he does wind up throwing the turtle. And it's at this point where Misa reveals what his plan actually is. And it turns out it now puts Narancia and the turtle in the optimal position to be free. And with that, he then proceeds to use his Sex Pistols to blow up the boat by shooting it in the engine, which of course causes Coco Jumbo and Narancia to fly free from the boat. At which point, Bruno proceeds to emerge from Coco Jumbo completely unscathed. And of course, it's at this point where Chocolate becomes increasingly very much upset, pointing out that obviously they got away from his Green Day without actually dying, and does point out that obviously that's not the big deal, but he does, and then he proceeds to give a sinister smile, pointing out that makes him a little bit more excited. But yeah, so this episode obviously is very important. Obviously, this episode explains how stands work and where they came from, which is a very big thing that the story has kind of not really addressed. Obviously, there's the idea of the stand arrows, which create stands, and then obviously some people develop their stands naturally, but this episode hasn't really explained. This episode finally explains what the origins of stands actually are. It explains how stands actually came from a meteorite, and the ensuing virus through viral evolution just gave people stands. Not everybody, obviously not most people aren't fit enough to actually develop stands, but those that do, and through an unknown factor, but most likely their determination and willpower, they wind up developing stands, and that's very interesting. And then also, you got Chocolata, who is introduced as the main antagonist of the next arc, and he's a bit of a psychopath. I will openly admit that. He's a psychopath. There's no sugarcoating that. But yeah, in any case, this episode was interesting for those reasons. It is fun that they finally address how stands work and what they do. But I am very happy that they finally did indeed address that. That is a very important thing that I didn't know they were actually going to eventually address that. That's very interesting. That stands come from viral evolution. That is an interesting thing that I didn't think they were going to bring up. But I am very much glad they did, because it does make the series feel a bit more fleshed out. But in any case, yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this review. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to check me out over on Twitter and down in the description. Be sure to check out my Patreon as well. Link is down in the description as well. Be sure to just go check out my Go check out my my Discord. Link is down in the description as well. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is a video I recommend to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!